The Distortus Rex, a nightmare-embodied mutant born not in nature but in a lab where science and madness collided. Created for the film Jurassic World Rebirth, this beast makes the Indominus Rex look like child's play. But what if we took this bioengineered terror and dropped it into our own prehistory? Could it survive the harsh worlds of the Triassic, Jurassic and Cretaceous periods? Could it adapt and thrive amongst the apex predators of each age? G'day everybody, I'm your host, diving into the burning question of if the Distortus Rex could survive in the Mesozoic. As always, we are dividing this into 3 sections which we will score. This includes environmental suitability, diet, and resistance to threat and competition. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's waste no more time and get into this. So, what exactly is the D-Rex? The Distortus Rex, also known as the Deformed King, is not the product of calculated genetic design. It is the result of a mutation spiraling out of control. Bred in secrecy by InGen during their later more desperate experiments into hybridization on our St. Hubert, the creature was meant to be caged, studied, and controlled. That control ended the moment a candy wrapper jammed in the facility's systems, triggering a lock failure that led to the evacuation of the island. Physically, the Distortus Rex is a grotesque powerhouse, standing over 8.1 meters or 26.6 feet tall and stretching 14.5 meters or 47.6 feet long. Its weight has been estimated to be between 5 and 22 metric tons. Yeah, classic Jurassic franchise hitting us with all those inconsistent weights. But for this video, I'll be going with 22 tons as this thing is absolutely ginormous. Way bigger than any other theropod we've seen so far. That is of course if they don't officially change its size sometime in the future. Anyways, unlike traditional theropods which are bipedal, the D-Rex for the most part is a quadruped. Its massive front limbs are pillar-like, capable of both locomotion and devastating physical attacks. Though it still has those shorter T.rex limbs, counting to a total of 6 appendages. Its body is hunched and dense, its tail long and muscular, and its skull features a beluga-like forehead with tiny eyes and a relatively small mouth full of short razor-sharp teeth that trade finesse for sheer carnage. It somehow even has the capability of standing on its hind legs. Imagine seeing that. When it comes to its intelligence, well, the Distortus is not all that intelligent like the Indominus Rex or calculating like the Indoraptor. In fact, it barely demonstrates more than animalistic curiosity, being fascinated by new objects, movements, or lights. What it lacks in brain power, however, it compensates with pure destructive force. It has been shown to be capable of crushing a helicopter in its jaws before hurling it like a toy, as well as making a speeding jeep come to a stop with a single arm. It also not only was capable of breaking out of its containment unit, but straight out destroyed a majority of it. It also seemed to be only active during the night, possibly making it a nocturnal predator. The island that it lived on was also filled with a number of different dinosaurs that may have acted as competition or prey. Competition may have been in the form of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, Spinosaurus, Velociraptor, or Mutodons. For potential prey, well, there was Titanosaurus, Triceratops, Parasaurolophus, and Ankylosaurus. Considering that it lived on this island for well over a decade, it would have certainly picked off many of these prey options. Still, with all this, the hybrid is relatively slow, likely being due to the malformations of its overall body plan. In the ecosystem of our St. Hubert, the Distortus Rex is literally the apex predator. Now it's time to see how it performs in the past. So our first stop as always is in the Triassic, more specifically in Argentina's Los Colorados Formation, which was packed with some of the largest terrestrial animals that the Triassic could ever offer. The temperature of this environment would have ranged quite a bit, but if it was anything similar to the Ischgulastia Formation, it should have averaged between 9.4 to 17.5 degrees Celsius or 48.9 to 63.5 degrees Fahrenheit. This land was ruled by seasonal extremes. Monsoons hammered the floodplain, turning dry valleys into raging waterways, and then just as suddenly the water could vanish, leaving behind a semi-arid wasteland. Vegetation would often be scattered and low to the ground. To survive here, you don't just need power, you need adaptability, patience, and the ability to weather out both predators and droughts. The thing is, when it comes to the D-Rex, it is arguably one of the toughest theropods from the JP universe. Mind you, these theropods have been shown to be capable of surviving in many different environments where other dinosaurs in the franchise would fail. Also, considering alone that it managed to survive with all of its mutations makes me lean in favor of it pretty hard. For environmental suitability, I score the D-Rex a 7 out of 10. It is not the perfect environment for it, but it could surely make itself comfortable. Though what about prey? This thing was an absolute unit and thus require a solid amount of calories to keep going. In this region, there have been quite a few synapsids discovered, including cynodonts and dicynodonts, the largest of which in this region was J. Caleria, a 3 meter or 9.8 foot long and 300 300 kilogram or 660 pound animal, but that seems like a drop in the bucket compared to a 20-ton titan. There had to be heavier animals in this area, right? Well, if you thought that, then you would be correct. This came in the form of early sauropod morphs. Rauisuchian was a stocky, long-necked herbivore measuring up to 10 meters or 33 feet long and weighed as much as 3 tons. Mesozoic was a massive early sauropod morph reaching around 12 meters or 39 feet in length and weighed as much as 10 tons. Its powerful build and towering height made it one of the largest animals of its time. Too big to chase and too dangerous to bring down for a majority of predators around. However, the Distortus trex was not like a majority of predators around, so if it catches up to this prey option, then it would definitely make the most out of it. However, the biggest issue for the T.rex when it comes to prey is that the majority of creatures in this area would be rather small, being 300 kilograms or less, pretty much limiting it to the large sauropod morphs or the very large synapsids. This could pose a bit of a challenge when having to find a consistent source of food. Thus, it would earn a dietary score of 7 out of 10. It really only loses out not because it couldn't take on everything in the area, rather there were not too many sizable creatures it could pick off. But now we go into threats and competition. Were there many creatures in this ecosystem that could pose much of a threat to this mutant? And I'll keep it honest, absolutely not. While the Triassic does contain some mutants that would pose quite a threat to a number of different animals now modern day, the T.rex is a different type of beast entirely. The largest carnivore in this region was Rauisuchian. Now its size is something of a bit of debate. I've seen people place it over 2 tons, but for this video we'll have it around 1.3 tons, larger than any terrestrial predator that is alive today. But in comparison with prehistoric standards, it is far from the largest, let alone compared to a giant that is the T.rex. Realistically, the Distortus trex would likely view this carnivore more as a prey option rather than an actual threat or source of competition. Another notable predator in this region included the 70 kilogram or 154 pound Yangchuanosaurus, a theropod that roamed the region. There were also other small archosaur morphs, but nothing that would pose quite a challenge. These creatures would either act as light snacks or be a source of ambience around the area. So how would the T.rex score when it comes to resisting threats and competition? Well, it gets a solid 9 out of 10. In pure physical stats, it dwarfs everything around, allowing it to take control of the territory and steal carcasses with no challenge. Its only issue would be that since it's far from the fastest creature around, it may not be able to catch up to all of its competition. So how does the Distortus trex stack up when it comes to its ultimate survival in the late Triassic? Well, this is not the ideal paradise for a mutant apex predator. The T.rex enters a world that's harsh, unstable, full of much smaller prey on competition, a serious mismatch in scale. Its survival in the face of its own mutations gives it endurance, resilience, and power, allowing it to dominate in places it probably shouldn't. At first, it would likely struggle to adjust. The prey is smaller, the terrain less forgiving, and the weather erratic. But given its physical advantages, it would likely be able to adapt quite quickly, as long as it does not just stomp around like a brute. Ambushing near dry riverbeds, stalking floodplain trails, and picking off anything unfortunate enough to lag far behind would be the strategy for taking on the smaller prey options such as Jacalaria. The larger herbivores like the sauropod morphs would be high value targets. Slower than most, visible, and incapable of outmuscling a beast like this, these would make up the bulk of its diet. It could likely just ram the sides of these creatures, standing up on its hind legs and pushing them down to the ground. Eventually, the T.rex would establish itself as a solitary, wide-ranging apex predator, pushing other carnivores out or straight out eliminating them. Considering it could pick up a helicopter and throw it, I reckon it could do the exact same thing to the resident's largest predator, Rauisuchian. In the end, while not perfectly suited for the Triassic, the Distortus trex would adapt, dominate, and probably do a lot better than you'd expect for something of its overall build. Its ultimate survival score tallies to 23 out of 30. Its biggest challenges would be the lack of consistently large prey and an environment too unpredictable for a creature built for control. Now we move on to the Jurassic, and I know what you all are thinking. We have to be going to either the classic American or European formations. Instead, we're going up to China's Shaanxi Formation, a very underrated area when it comes to Jurassic dinosaurs, though try to forgive me for butchering any pronunciations going further. The environment of this formation during the Middle Jurassic was far from stable. The climate would swing between arid, subhumid, and even humid phases. This meant that the environment was constantly shifting. The landscape itself would have included river systems, floodplains, muddy lowlands, but also drier uplands and open exposed ground. This environment did allow for many large sauropods to survive, so for something smaller like the T.rex, I think it could be relatively okay. For the T.rex, it would take some time getting used to. However, considering the dinosaurs in this area got to quite large sizes, with many sauropods populating the area, reflects that the environment still allowed for giants to roam. Thus, the T.rex would be in a relatively comfortable position, receiving an environmental suitability score of 7.5 out of 10. Now, this ecosystem has a number of different dinosaurs, which is a perfect upgrade from the Triassic. Small game would likely be ignored unless they literally walked into the palm or mouth of this mutant. So we have to straight away move to our medium-sized prey options, which include a number of stegosaurids, the largest of which was Yangchuanosaurus, which reached over 6 meters or 19 feet in length and weighed in at around 2.8 tons. However, there were at least 6 other species of stegosaurids which called this place home. Of course, when you think of these dinosaurs, you would think of their backplates and their thagomisers, which of course they did possess. Spoiler alert, a conflict would not end too well for our real-world stegosaurids. Then of course we have the largest prey options around, which were the sauropods. There were a number of sauropods that littered this ecosystem. This included the 3-ton Yangchuanosaurus and the 15 meter or 49 foot Distortus. There were of course some bigger ones around, such as Rauisuchian, which grew around 20 meters or 65 feet in length and could have weighed over 9.8 tons. The true giant, however, was Mesozoic, with some stretching over 35 meters or 115 feet long and tipping the scales at over 50 tons. Its famously long neck allowed it to dominate the upper canopy, accessing food few other herbivores could ever reach. Personally, I think the smaller sauropods which roam the area would be fair prey to fill up the T.rex. However, the heavier Mesozoic could certainly pose a big threat considering it is over twice the size of this mutant. The biggest drawback for the T.rex is we don't know exactly how this creature hunts, but considering it is argued to be one of the strongest theropods, it would likely be capable of taking on the sauropods within its own size range. I believe when it comes to its diet, the T.rex would be in a far better position than in the Triassic. There were many more larger prey options for it to feast upon, and to be honest, unless considering the absolute largest prey options, most would provide little resistance. Here, the T.rex would attain a dietary score of 9 out of 10. As for threats and competition, well, a number of theropods littered this ecosystem, but could any of them pose a challenge to the top tier mutant? And to answer that question, well, the largest theropod around was more so a medium-sized theropod. The smaller carnivores around included Gasosaurus and Sinraptor would either step into the 1-ton territory or weigh a fair bit below it. These predators would be nothing more than scavengers to something as large as the T.rex. However, the theropod that stood above all the rest in this region was Yangchuanosaurus. This theropod measured around 10.8 meters or 35 feet in length and stood over 3 meters or 9.8 feet in height. This species weighed in at around 3 tons. So yeah, upon saying that, I think it might have been clear that the theropod was large for its area, but in comparison to the T.rex, rather small. In any case, this species of theropod could act as some sort of competition. It is large enough to the point to where it could hunt the medium-sized prey in the area, and it would have certainly been quicker on its feet compared to the lumbering giant. Thus, the T.rex's resistance to threats and competition scores to 9 out of 10. It is just way too large to have its main sources of prey to be competed against. So how does the T.rex actually perform in this ecosystem? Honestly, I think it would have a relatively good time here, way better than it did the Triassic. This is not some primitive landscape where everything is under 10 meters. This formation is teeming with large dinosaurs, giant sauropods, armored stegosaurs, and a decent variety of medium-sized theropods makes this place feel a lot more like a Jurassic stronghold than a middle stage ecosystem, and this works perfectly in the favor of the T.rex. At first, it will take some getting used to. The terrain may be shifting, but this mutant is built to endure. It could rely on its stealth for ambush attacks, and eventually it would have to catch something. The local herbivores would provide a buffet of options. Stegosaurids could make for reliable meals. Sure, they might be dangerous for most carnivores, but not so much for something as large as the T.rex. The sauropods, however, is where things get interesting. While it might not tangle against a full-size Mesozoic unless desperate, juveniles or smaller species of sauropods would offer huge calorie payoffs with moderate risk. Considering it is practically kaiju size and weighs as much as some sauropods, I think it has the favourable odds against most sauropods in this region. And let's be honest, I doubt the T.rex is all that picky. It won't care if its food has armor, a tail club, or even a 30-foot neck. If it can take it down, it likely will. As for competition, well, there's nothing too much to worry about. Yangchuanosaurus is decently sized, but not that big, likely just trailing the T.rex for scraps. Just seeing this beast would cause every native predator to scatter. Most would likely shift to scavenging or keep to the fringes, leaving the T.rex uncontested as the region's apex. In time, the T.rex would carve out a wide range, following herds, dominating waterholes, and crushing anything dumb enough to get into its way or anything unfortunate enough for it to be curious about. It's not just surviving here, it is thriving. We also cannot forget that the T.rex does seem to be nocturnal. This doesn't work well for their favour considering the T.rex can now be cloaked by the shadow of night. So it does seem that the T.rex suits this ecosystem rather well. There's big prey, little threat, and enough environmental suitability to keep it going. It earns an ultimate survival score of 25.5 out of 30. So now we are onto the last period of the Mesozoic, this being the Cretaceous period. Now, to be honest, I was tossing up whether to put this mutant into Africa, South America, or North America, but solely because it has Rex in its name, I think you can't go wrong with putting it into the classic Hell's Creek formation. This formation of the late Cretaceous was an ecosystem characterized by a warm subtropical climate. It featured diverse habitats including coastal plains, rivers, floodplains, all of which supported a rich array of flora and fauna. The climate was relatively stable with abundant rainfall fostering lush vegetation such as angiosperms, ferns, and conifers. For the T.rex, this environment would be an opportunity. The dense vegetation could hinder its movement slightly, but the overall abundance of water sources and diverse habitats reflecting its home habitat on the island would provide ample opportunities for ambush tactics and territorial dominance. This earns it an environmental suitability score of 8 out of 10. For a creature like the Distortus Trex, the herbivores of the late Cretaceous wouldn't just be prey, they would be milestones, challenges, sometimes even genuine roadblocks. But let's start small. This ecosystem had its fair share of herbivores, from the nimble Struthiomimus and Pachycephalosaurus to various smaller ornithopods and oviraptorosaurs. These creatures would be to T.rex what birds are to a dragon. Fast? Sure. Agile? Yes. Dangerous? Not remotely. If one of these poor dinosaurs wandered into the T.rex's path, it wouldn't be a fight, it would be over instantly. But the real test comes with the large herbivores that everyone knows and loves. Let's start with the biggest challenge for the Distortus Rex. This would be, of course, the Ceratopsians. Both Triceratops and Taurosaurus were absolute tanks, designed not to just survive predator attacks, but to fight back. These animals were massive, stretching over 9 meters or 30 feet in length and weighing in at over 10 tons. With a body plan that prioritized defense and raw power, they were ready to defend themselves at any moment. These herbivores came equipped with 2 massive brow horns and a sharp nasal horn, as well as towering bone-reinforced frills which acted as a natural guard for their neck. Despite being larger, stronger, and likely more durable than a T.rex, the Distortus Rex would still have to be careful here. One bad angle or misplaced grapple could end with these horns punching clean through its side. If the T.rex wanted to bring one down, it would need to isolate individuals and use its powerful forelimbs and weight to overpower and flip this dinosaur. Then we have Ankylosaurus, the mobile fortress. It was heavily armored and put all of its points into defense. This herbivore reached around 6 meters or 19.7 feet long and weighed in at around 5 tons. Its back was protected by thick osteoderms that made biting through it nearly impossible, but the real threat came in the form of its clubbed tail, something that was capable of swinging out bone-shattering forces. For the T.rex to take one of these herbivores down, it would have to use its incredible strength to flip it over onto its back. I think that this herbivore could actually be a favourite snack because of this tactic. Last but not to be underestimated is Yangchuanosaurus. It may not have had horns, armor, or weaponry, but this hadrosaur could still pose a serious challenge. These herbivores could get to rather large sizes, being over 12 meters or 39 feet long and weighing everywhere from 5 to over 10 tons. Yangchuanosaurs may have moved in large herds, using numbers and sheer mass as a defense mechanism. For the T.rex, smaller or isolated individuals would be perfect targets, especially if caught off guard. But charging into a group would be dangerous even for something of its size. An early ambush would likely lead to a herd of Yangchuanosaurs escaping unscathed. Being so slow, if it failed its ambush, there was no way it would catch up to these herbivores. For its diet, I do think that there are a number of potential options for the T.rex to consume. Sure, the smaller options would likely be ignored or too difficult to catch, but there was large game available. However, I do think it scores below what it performed in the Jurassic, being at a 7 out of 10 in the Cretaceous. This is because the prey here was either faster or better equipped to deal with threats. The Distortus Rex may have survived the dawn of the dinosaurs and outlasted the Jurassic giants, but here in the final age of the dinosaurs, its dominion is not guaranteed. This formation is teeming with contenders, scavengers, and opportunists, and in an ecosystem like this, there was one king that ruled. But I'll keep it honest, when it comes to the dubious smaller theropods like Dakotaraptor and Nanotyrannus, they would not hold a candle to this giant. The T.rex may have weighed over 15 times heavier than these two. These theropods were not even messing with the apex predator of this ecosystem, let alone a giant mutant. But now we come to arguably one of the few competitors we could throw at the T.rex, this being Tyrannosaurus Rex, the deformed king up against the tyrant lizard king. The T-rex is often known as the apex above apexes, being over 12.1 meters or 40 feet long and weighing in between 9 to 12 tons. It stood above most megatheropods. With a skull the size of a man and the biforce that could turn bone to dust, it was an impressive competitor. Against most other competitors, the Distortus' size would be enough to keep most back, but against a native tyrant? Well, yeah, look, I'll be honest, when it comes to direct combat, it would again be pretty okay. It is way too large for any ordinary Rex to even attempt to go against it, and the fact is, it is large and strong enough to grab a helicopter from the sky. With the arm reach alone, it will likely be capable of grappling against this tyrant. I won't count out the T-rex completely though. There is a lot of evidence of intraspecific conflict in T-rex fossils, showing bite marks on skulls, healed tail vertebrae, and damaged jaws. That means if a conflict did occur, it would likely pick up some significant injuries from those powerful jaws that could deliver over 50,000 newtons of force. To be honest, the biggest issue from my perspective isn't that the T-rex would be a direct threat, rather a true competitor. Being smaller, which is crazy to say about the T-rex, faster and more of an effective predator, it could very well make life difficult for a D-rex. While scavenging can work for this mutant for a while, it still very well needs to hunt. It could not rely on it exclusively. This would earn the D-rex a resistance to threat and competition score of 6 out of 10. The real area dragging it down is not the threat, but rather the competition it would have to face. So, how would the D-rex perform in the Cretaceous? Well, I don't think it would necessarily be an improvement from the Jurassic. See, while the Jurassic offered a buffet of large, slow-moving prey with minimal resistance, the late Cretaceous is a fair bit different. This is an ecosystem where nearly every herbivore is either too fast to catch or quite dangerous to hunt, and that creates some serious problems. Ornithomimids like Struthiomimus might be large enough to gain the interest of this predator, but good luck to it catching them. They're fast, agile, and incredibly alert. Could the D-rex ambush them? Sure. It's got the raw power and curiosity to pull it off, but is that really worth the energy expended? Not really. Hadrosaurs like Yangchuanosaurus would arguably be the most favourable option, as they could grow fairly large and they were not quicker than the Ornithomimids. However, they would still exceed the speed of the D-rex, meaning it would have to choose its ambush position very carefully. On the flip side, you've got the Ceratopsians, Triceratops and Torosaurus. These two were where the real danger existed. These animals would likely have been tanks with tempers. Unlike the Stegosaurids, which could be picked off with good positioning and simple overpowering, the Ceratopsians would be a lot harder. They would be used to taking on large theropods such as the T-rex, so they could cause some issues. Am I saying that they would beat the D-rex in a fight? No, in a one-on-one battle, a clean hit from the D-rex would likely bring a Triceratops to the ground, but it would likely not come without cost. Those brow horns were very much capable of puncturing through flesh. A single bad move and the D-rex could walk away with a punctured arm, something it could not afford as it had to move on all 4 limbs. And then there's Ankylosaurus, and frankly this matchup is one of the better ones for the D-rex. While the Ankylosaurus is a bunker being low to the ground, wrapped in armor, and had a clubbed tail that could crush femurs, the D-rex was capable of stopping a jeep with one arm without even budging. While there is risk involved, I believe the D-rex could be an active hunter of this species. I mean, they're slow and relatively lightweight compared to the D-rex, and considering it casually through a helicopter, I believe flipping an Ankylosaurus would not be all that much harder for it. It can and would be done. But maybe the biggest wildcard here isn't the prey, it's the Tyrannosaurus rex, because unlike the Jurassic or Triassic, the T-rex is not the only apex predator. Tyrannosaurus rex called this place home and there are a number of them around. While the T-rex might be physically more imposing, the T-rex was built specifically for this ecosystem. It was built for the terrain, it was faster, it was more efficient. A showdown between these two would result in the T-rex walking away, but attaining injuries over time could end up wearing it down. Instead, its best way to survive is to ensure that any rival rexes are pushed outside its territory, providing the D-rex full access to the prey options that stumble within its region. So, for the Cretaceous period, the D-rex earns an ultimate survival score of 21 out of 30. The Distortus rex may have been a beast within its own film, but not every era was made for beasts. I believe that it is arguably the toughest and strongest theropod from the franchise, but that does not equate to a better survival score. I believe with its overall body build, speed, and intelligence, it is actually a rather worse off survivor compared to the other theropods in the franchise. Its worst fit was the Cretaceous period, scoring a 21 out of 30. This might be surprising to some, but this was a time where smarter, faster, and more heavily armored dinosaurs made life a constant challenge. Unlike the other periods that had no other competitors, the T-rexes were more than capable of hunting down the same prey options, limiting resources. The Triassic was a bit better, giving a landscape full of smaller competition and just enough large prey to let it dominate and survive off of, allowing it to score a 23 out of 30. But the Jurassic is where it scored the best. This was where large dinosaurs roamed and apex competition was laughable by comparison. With a high score of 25.5 out of 30, this is where the T.rex thrived the most. And now we've reached the end of the video. As always, I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribe, and let me know what you thought of Jurassic World Rebirth. Also, I wanted to ask, what would you like to see in the future? I was tossing up the idea of the Disney Carno or maybe even the Scorpius Rex, but I would like to hear what you all would want to see. I'll catch you all in the next video, see ya.